Okay.
Now walk.
Okay, now what do I do?
Perfect. Like this.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea Calkins, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the fats we eat. Through the years in diet trends, we tend to cut fat out of our diet, but the truth is we give fat a bad rap, but it's actually good for us. According to an article on Spark People, Sarah Han, a registered dietitian, wrote, "If you're always choosing low-fat or fat-free foods at the grocery store, you could be shortchanging your weight loss. Many of these processed foods contained added sugars to enhance taste, often are similar in the calories to the original full-fat product. Research has also shown that people tend to believe foods like these are freebies and will overeat them. And this tends to thinking they're getting a low-calorie diet, but fat actually helps carry flavor in our food and also leads to fullness and satiety, so you can actually go longer in between meals and snacks than you would if you ate something with more sugar but tends to have empty calories. In addition to fat, it is one of the highest energy foods or substances we can ingest, and it has 9 calories per gram of fat. Going into what I'm going to talk about next is the 3 types of fat we ingest, but before we do that quite yet, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what fat is actually made of. It's made up mostly of triglycerides, and the molecular structure, it's basically a glycerol and fatty acids. And the glycerol tends to be the backbone, which is the base of your fat, and then these long chains are the fatty acids, and they are made up of hydrogen and carbon. The difference between saturated fat, as you can see it's in a straight line, and unsaturated fat that tends to curve down, is due to a thing called double bonds within the carbon. And the double bonds will actually cause kinks in the fat, and those are unsaturated fats. Saturated fats do not contain double bonds. The 3 types of fat in our food are saturated, unsaturated, and trans fat. Saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, and this is due to the fact that what we just saw, they don't contain double bonds, so they're able to pack closely together and create more of a solid form. Most saturated fats come from animal products like meat and dairy and butter. They are rich in fat-soluble vitamins like A, K, and E, and cholesterol comes from saturated fat. And cholesterol is actually vital to life. It's in every cell membrane in our body, and it actually helps in hormone production like testosterone and cortisol. There's several health benefits to eating saturated fats, including it raises your good cholesterol or HDL levels. It aids in brain health. Actually, our brain is made up mostly of fat and cholesterol, and most of that is saturated fat. It aids in cardiovascular health and immune and bone health. For bone health, it actually helps with incorporating calcium into our bones, and without that, we would tend to have more of a brittle bone, and we would have bone loss, which is never good, and it leads to poor bone density. It also aids in the nervous system and several other things. Recent studies and reports show that they are challenging or developing that the idea of saturated fat is related to heart disease is not necessarily true. And it is best that if you're going to eat saturated fats, it's best to eat the source that also had a diet natural to it. For instance, grass-fed beef or dairy from grass-fed cows. According to the health.gov's dietary guidelines, the daily allowance for saturated fat is 20 grams or less based on a 2,000 calorie diet, and this can vary depending on your needs or your calories per day that you require. And these are the foods for saturated fat, which we talked about is mostly meats, dairies, also unsaturated fat. Usually these are liquid at room temperature, and this goes back to those double bonds within the carbon, and they cause the kinks in the tails of the fatty chain. And this happens to let the molecules not pack as closely together, and so they tend to stay liquid at room temperature. Most sources of unsaturated fat are from plants and some animals, which are usually like vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fish, and oils. There are two basic types of unsaturated fat, and it's monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat. Monounsaturated fat, once again at room temperature, is good in food sources, or comes in food sources, olive oil, peanut and canola oil, avocados, and most nuts. Polyunsaturated fats are actually considered our essential fats, and our body actually requires these for normal function, and our bodies actually do not produce these at all. There are two main types of polyunsaturated fats, which include omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acid foods would be our fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines. Flax seeds and walnuts are also a good source. For omega-6 foods, vegetable oils like sunflower oil and walnuts, etc. would also be a good source for food that contain omega-6s. The health benefits to unsaturated fats is, the list actually goes on, but here's an overview of some more important ones, I guess. Would be lower risk of breast cancer, reduced cholesterol levels. Monounsaturated fat, believe it or not, can actually reduce belly fat and aid in weight loss. Unsaturated fat can also reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases and diabetes, increase feelings of satiety, which we talked about earlier, so you could go longer in between meals, aid in vitamin absorption, like vitamins A, K, and E, which are actually fat soluble, so they need the fat to be able to break down and be absorbed into the body. They aid in brain and joint health, better sleep quality, and so on and so forth. And the adverse effects of a deficiency in our essential fatty acids can actually be quite alarming. The recommended daily allowance for unsaturated fats is around 70 grams a day based on a 2,000 calorie diet again. Note that we should consume omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids usually in a 1-to-1 ratio of tablespoons, but we currently on average consume about 15 tablespoons of omega-6 fatty acids to only a tablespoon of omega-3 fatty acids. Oh, and these are the foods, once again, fatty fish, nuts, and oils are basic food groups for unsaturated fats. Next, we're going into trans fats, which are actually bad for you. While the other fats are really good for you and essential to our body functions, trans fats are considered bad for us, and they are also known as hydrogenated vegetable oils or hydrogenated oils in general. Food labels sometimes will label that there isn't certain fats because it's below a certain level, but if you look at the ingredients, it will say hydrogenated oils, and so you know there is actual trans fat in there. Trans fat is actually naturally occurring in very small amounts within our foods, but for the most part, it's actually the byproduct of a chemically altered unsaturated fats where they go in and hydrogenate our unsaturated fats and create a new product, which tends to stay solid at room temperature and doesn't go rancid as quickly as regular unsaturated fat would. And this is most commonly in foods like fast food and processed foods and actually baked goods. There are several negative health effects with trans fat, which it can raise your bad cholesterol, create inflammation, increase insulin resistance, which can actually lead to type 2 diabetes. It increases the risk of stroke, diabetes, and other chronic conditions, and it can contribute to, well, there's our fast food, coronary heart disease. The daily recommended value for trans fat, while there isn't really any proven health benefits or a real safe level, it's about 2 grams per day, which is actually the equivalent of 2 potato chips, which I'm sure most of us eat a lot more than that in trans fat a day. Actually, according to research from the Harvard School of Public Health and elsewhere, indicates that trans fat can be harmful in even small amounts. For every 2% of calories that trans fat is consumed daily, we increase the risk of heart disease by 23%. It's pretty scary. It is probably safe to say that minimal to none of trans fat is best for your daily allowance. Overall, in conclusion, I would say it is best to avoid trans fat, monitor saturated fats, and if you're going to ingest most fats, try to have unsaturated fats, or keep an equal ratio between that and saturated fat. If you ever plan to cut anything from your diet, please research it, because I feel like when we hear the word fat, we just have such a negative connotation attached to it, but actually they're essential for our body, and depleting it from our diet can actually have several adverse reactions. According to a blog on naturalhealthyconcepts.com, Ashley Steinbrück wrote that it can actually, the lack of omegas and imbalanced ratios of omega and omega-6s can actually lead to acne, ADD, ADHD, Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, asthma, cancer, high blood pressure, obesity, depression, and the list goes on. Also, deficiency in general of our essential fatty acids. You can get things from skin irritation like dry patches, scaly skin, dull, oily patches, brittle or unruly hair, stiff or painful joints, dry mouth, depression again, poor concentration. You can actually crave fatty foods, and you can actually overeat or overcompensate for this deficiency. So like I said, cutting fats from our diet can actually have really severe adverse reactions to our bodies, and fats are essential for our bodies and good for you. So I hope that overall I kind of enlightened your view on fat, and I hope that you have a better outlook on it now. Thank you.